Welcome back to the final episode of Femsci Corner. My name is Amelia, I'm your host, and today we're just going to wrap everything up. This three-part installment of feminist methodologies in science and how feminist science is effective in changing the way we research and produce knowledge. This podcast is for anybody who is in either of these fields. These could be students, teachers, researchers, scientists. This is mainly for the science community to show how feminism can be very impactful on that work. So today we're going to jump right in. And our big question, now that we've learned about these different methodologies and ways of thinking, do these methods actually work? So we're going to start with a pretty big piece in the feminist science world. It is called Has Feminism Changed Science by Londa Schiebinger. This piece, she talks a lot about, it was written in 2000, but she talks a lot about the work she had done throughout the 80s and 90s and gives us a little bit of historical context on how feminism has changed the face of science. So she starts out to tell us that discrimination has tainted much of scientific research and has really influenced whose perspective are deemed scientific fact. So, like we've talked about, the situated knowledge of who is in the center, who is bringing their intersectional biases into knowledge production and research. If you have wealthy white male scientists, researchers, doctors, teachers, anything like that, researching and collecting data, their perspective is being put into what's produced. And these things are all taken as scientific fact. Now that we're decades later, we're able to kind of look back and say, hey, this isn't true for everyone. And that's the whole point of feminist science. She goes on to also talk about two fields that gender studies deeply impacts, scientific fields, those two being medicine and pathology. So the biggest thing that really got feminists involved in making sure science is inclusive was a physician's health study of aspirin and cardiovascular disease back in the 80s. The male body was represented as the typical homogenous body until feminists started questioning mainstream biomedicine and the knowledge it was producing. They were wondering why male symptoms are being shown for things, but actually for women it's different, and different kinds of bodies it's different. And for a lot of health studies, no woman took part in them. They were almost all male subjects, and even when they did, men were still seen as the majority. And this knowledge was what circles as common knowledge was male results only. So for example, we're always taught symptoms of a heart attack, or a stroke, anything like that. We're always taught these symptoms, but those are the male symptoms that are being taught. The numbness in the left arm, heart racing, sweating, things like that. Those are all male symptoms. Female symptoms are actually very different. And none of us know that. It's still very mainstream to circle those key symptoms. People could lose their lives because they don't know if they're having a heart attack. So feminists began advocating for women in medical and biomedicine fields just for more representation, more in-depth study. And because of this, speaking up, in 1986, it finally became a requirement for medical research to include female subjects. And then, even further, in the early 1990s, millions of dollars were finally put into feminist medical research, and the National Institute of Health opened its own office of research in women's health. So, despite years of being dominated by male knowledge, medical fields began to incorporate feminist perspectives and feminist research. And additionally, in 1994, Congress enacted 25 pieces of legislation to improve the health of American women. So this was a really big step for feminism, and just it really only took a few people to notice where that knowledge was being centered and who that was coming from, and to question that for this big of a change to happen. These reforms were huge. And then additionally, Schiebinger discusses primatology, which is the study of the behavior, biology, evolution, and taxonomy of non human primates. They've always had very stereotypical attitudes towards male and female subjects. And in the 1960s, even further back, they started to question it. So Schiebinger is really putting forth the idea that feminism has changed science and can continue to change science. And I want to take it even further and say that, yes, for the times, all of these acts were so beneficial to everyone, but mainly scientific communities. And it allowed for a lot of recentering of knowledge and thought. But I believe even further now, we have more of an understanding of trans bodies and reproductive health care and different identities other than the binary of male and female. And I believe we can really take a lot of what Schiebinger is saying and push it even further to include those categories more. Next, I want to talk about a journal from Catherine Scantlebury, who's a professor in chemistry and biology. She discusses the alienation of being a feminist in a scientific field, but also the responsibility and privilege she feels she has to improve gender equity and equality. Catherine starts out by telling us about her experience being a professor and how she often does feel alienated and notices female students being alienated because science education always has such a masculine image. These stereotypes that develop from the curriculum just throughout our education. I remember even being a young child, it was always like math and science were for boys and reading and social studies were for girls. And that's not how it went. I never liked math and science, and it makes me wonder if that was because of stereotypes against it. And additionally, the material taught in a lot of science education doesn't connect to the real world in the ways that feminist pedagogy and feminist teaching does. Catherine Scantlebury suggests that feminist pedagogy be introduced into scientific fields, particularly with the lens of political, critical, and praxis, feminist teaching methods. And she does this in her own classroom. She talks about her own experience, and she did note some bad interactions with male students and male faculty. But overall, she said the method has really changed how science is taught in her undergraduate classrooms, and she has seen a difference in diversity in her rooms and how much non male presenting people speak up and participate. So, those are just a couple of scholarly articles that discuss a little bit more about what this looks like in the real world. And now I want to talk about some modern examples of feminism being so deeply embedded in science and what that looks like. So, I want to give a couple examples of feminist labs. The first one is the CLEAR Lab, which stands for Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research. And this is directly from their lab book. They detail their collective and their stance as a feminist anti colonial laboratory. They say they value humility, equity, and good land relations. And they're working on changing how scientific research operates. Their goals are to make sure decisions about scientific knowledge and procedures are carefully based on their values and their feminist approach of decentering and intersectionality. So this lab does environmental projects, and they're so conscious of whose land they're on and whose perspective is being centering and how their knowledge is being created. Another lab is the Data Plus Feminism Lab. They use data and computational methods to work towards gender and racial justice, particularly as they relate to space and place. So they have a lot of initiatives happening. One I really love is focused on reproductive bodies and healthcare before, during, and after birth, for people who give birth. Making breast pumps more comfortable, making health care more accessible, making hospitals safer. And the feminist approach to this has provided some really wonderful data. And then finally, the Gender Sci Lab, which is a collaborative interdisciplinary feminist lab. They're dedicated to generating feminist concepts, methods, and theories for scientific research on sex and gender. Through this research, teaching, and public outreach, they work to advance the intersectional study of gender in the biomedical and allied sciences, counter bias and hype in sex difference research, and enhance public discourse surrounding the sciences of sex and gender. So, the whole purpose of this lab is to do exactly what we've been talking about and open up scientific research and data and information to those marginalized communities where it previously had not reached. So, after those few examples, we can see how a larger intervention of feminism into any field of science, whether it be environmental, biology, chemistry, medical, these sciences can all use feminist methodologies in some way, shape, or form, whether it be pedagogy, standpoint theory, intersectionality, situated knowledges. This is a very valuable solution to making science more accessible to everyone and making knowledge a little less biased and involved and inclusive, because everyone has the right to know about their bodies and the world around them. And everyone has the right to participate in fields that they are passionate about and they feel connected with. So, in conclusion of my entire podcast, feminism in science does work, it is effective, and it is very needed. I urge, if you're listening to this from a position of either a professor or a researcher, scientist, I urge you to share this or go do some more research about feminism in science, the history, and what else can be done. And with that, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Amelia. This is a final project for Women in Gender Studies 335, Science and Feminism. I've had such a wonderful time learning about these different concepts and applying methodologies that I've learned into scientific fields. And that's all. Thank you so much. My sources for this episode were Londa Schiebinger, Has Feminism Changed Science? Catherine Scantleberry, A Feminist Pedagogy in Undergraduate Science, Conflicting Concepts, The Clear Lab Book, the Data and Feminism Lab Mission Statement, and the Gender Sci Lab Mission Statement. Thank you.